Georgetown student-athletes have uniquely high expectations placed upon them, and we think it's important that they go through this workshop, which is entitled Power, Building Cultures of Compassionate Leadership Through Appropriate Understanding and Use of Power and Privilege. We train our student-athletes in anticipation of each graduate leaving the hilltop and becoming a significant person of influence, regardless of their choice of study, vocation, or field. As we provide instruction in creating a foundation of character and intelligence, and by that we mean social, emotional, cognitive, and sport-related intelligence, as the primary path to influence, we must address the appropriate use of power in social contexts. We actively educate Hoya athletes about their responsibilities as athletes on the field and students in the classroom, but their identity as social being requires equally consistent identities to be authentic and truly influential. A student-athlete's social identity is constantly in transition, and it's critical for them to have a great deal of self-awareness. Part of identity development is creating the best possible set of lenses through which to view critical decisions and do so in advance of moments in which such decisions are required. Ethical foundations have to be set in the cold and dispassionate light of day. As we create this workshop, national headlines are filled with stories of domestic violence, particularly with NFL players and men who have made poor decisions in the heat of moments because they weren't probably guided by those kind of ethical foundations. Power Quite often, it's out of a sense of uncertainty, inadequacy, fear, loneliness, or general discomfort. One of the goals of social identity development is to eliminate those factors that may lead to poor choices that are not consistent with a young person's preferred leader identity. A first important step in any conversation is definition. Merriam-Webster defines power as the ability or right to control people or things. Recently on campus, Professor Michael Eric Dyson spoke at a forum intended to reflect on injustice in Ferguson, Missouri, and he noted that you can't talk about power without also talking about privilege, which is particularly at a school like Georgetown. Merriam-Webster defines privilege as a right or benefit that is given to some people and not to others. Privilege is more subtle than power because many people that have it either have no idea they have it, or they may even actively discount the idea of being privileged. One classic example would be an unemployed but socioeconomically challenged, heterosexual, physically healthy white man who struggles to pay rent or groceries. He would likely vehemently deny the idea that he is in any way privileged, but by virtue of being a man, being white, being straight, and not being physically handicapped, there are unquestionably privileges that he realizes every day compared to women, to gays, disabled people, and people of color. One of the questions we want you to grapple with and ask yourself is, what are your sources of power and privilege? If you're new to Georgetown or if you've been in the community for a while, ask yourself, what are the things about you, what are your identities that give you power or privilege, or perhaps take it away? We know that power and privilege come from two sources, structures or personal choice and action. They can be given by institutions, social norms, and values. In any of those cases, it might be earned or not. What are some examples you can think of in terms of structural power? It might be given to presidents, leaders, or institutional organizations like police who did not necessarily do anything to earn the power, but have it as a result of the role they play in a particular system. At a personal level, power can be given willingly by people out of respect, acknowledgement of superiority, or perhaps a desire to be led. It can also be given unwillingly by people who are fearful, disenfranchised, or uneducated. Or it can be taken by people who use their privilege or other sources of power, like physical superiority, in unhealthy, antisocial ways. For example, bullies take power. People like Gandhi were given power by the public, even though Gandhi had no particular structural power. It was just because of the person he was. We give Jay-Z, Beyonce, and Blue Ivy a great deal of power because of their particular talents. We need to have a conversation about power and privilege because being aware of your sources of power and privilege is a critical step in forming your identity as a leader. You're going to be faced with choices every day as a student-athlete that present you with the opportunity to use your power for good, for justice, and for influence that creates positive change. Some of you have the type of power and privilege that make it very likely you will use that power for oppression in some way. And some of you are so lacking in power or privilege that you may find yourself giving in to oppression and accepting conditions that do not meet your basic human rights. Most of you are likely somewhere in between, and we want to equip you to understand where you might go wrong and become either a perpetrator or a victim. When we discuss power in a group context, the misuse that we are most concerned about in higher education is in rites of passage or initiation, things that your team does with freshmen or newcomers to separate them from the rest of the herd and welcome them into your tribe. Unfortunately, many athletic teams have traditions and rituals that they think are harmless because they've been done for generations, because they're viewed as instrumental bonding opportunities, because the upperclassmen had to go through it so they think everybody else should, or just because they've never been told otherwise. But the reality is that these kind of rituals do far more to destroy team chemistry and individual ability than they do to create it. And now they may be violations of the code of conduct or even the law if they fit the definition of hazing. On this slide, you can see the new definition that's been incorporated in Georgetown's Student Code of Conduct. And if you violate this, you will be held accountable for it. Please make sure you read this, are familiar with it, and reflect on it as you think about the things that you do to welcome people into your group, onto your team, and require them to stay there. It's worth taking a few minutes to talk about where humans get the idea of rites of passage that are at the sociological roots of hazing. According to anthropologists and psychologists, rites of initiation can serve different purposes. Basically, they help us to separate folks from outside of the group and bring them into the group. We're talking about separation, transition, basically social processes that lead people into new roles. Here's a short video clip about what some developing civilizations might have looked like, practices that are still in use by some tribes in different parts of the world today.
Most boys do want to do the initiation. It's not about looking beautiful, it's an initiation process. It's about becoming part of the community, and it's about becoming a real say big man.
First, the Pate will whip Mate 3 times, and then he will have to endure the same. Whoever hits the other the hardest and flinches the least when hit himself will be declared the winner. The Pati has endured a painful ordeal and become an adult member of the Fulani tribe.
There's clear precedent in the social norms of the very earliest stages of human civilization for much of what transpires on college campuses with groups that initiate new members and attempt to set themselves apart from other groups. Anthropologists note that there's often a mutilation aspect that physically distinguishes and separates, but there are also common practices such as beating, fasting, slapping, humiliating, depriving, and other such acts that involve physical or psychological pain, but no permanent mark or visible mark of separation. Modern initiation rituals in many groups present in higher education settings show strong parallels to those acts that physically distinguish and separate. One of the roots of such rites is the desire to create emotional bonding both with fellow participants and those who induce the suffering. It separates the new people from their previous group identities. But is pain necessary? The reality of modern society is that it is not. We know there are much more effective ways to create membership in groups, constructive ways to help people feel welcomed and a part of a new organization. So what does inappropriate use of power look like on campuses now? An examination of some of the unhealthy practices that can be seen in media headlines about athletics, bands, Greek organizations, and other college student groups reveals examples of what appears to be an effort to create bonding between those who suffer and those who impose suffering.
UNM Athletic Director Paul Krebs says there's no question this is hazing and that the entire team was involved to some degree. Said that the members of the team went from one player's house to another party drinking alcohol. Later Sunday night, police were called to an on-campus apartment where 2 players were so drunk they had to be sent to the hospital. A police report said drinking alcohol was part of an initiation for the team. Krebs confirmed that alcohol was involved.
3 investigations investigations of the university and hazing within the storied Marching 100 band. This week, Tallahassee police charged 3 students in connection with the battery and hazing of freshman clarinet player Bria Hunter. She claims her leg was broken in an initiation ceremony.
But there's another side to all this.
What's it like hitting someone?
The first year I was able to do it. It felt good.
It felt good.
Yes.
Sort of getting back at what had happened to you the year before.
Yes. The process is so intense. It's brewing. Got your blood boiling for the next person. Like it's a vampire looking for blood.
This morning, the University of North Carolina head football coach Larry Fedora suspended 4 players, actually happened yesterday, for the team's opener against Liberty. Martin, Yahoo Sports is reporting that this stems from a hazing incident that left 1 player with a concussion. Now, the UNC athletic department has come under a lot of scrutiny lately.
Bullying and hazing is a nationwide issue that affects the lives of young athletes. It will even follow them into their college careers.
There's a culture in athletics that needs to be changed. Whether you call it bullying, whether you call it hazing, whether you call it rite of passage, rituals, whatever terms you want to use, it's got to change.
And now to the latest on the temporary suspension of York College's wrestling program. College officials say it's the result of hazing and physical assault allegations.
Cornell is taking hazing incredibly serious. They have effectively a no hazing policy, a no hazing allowed policy. And so their lacrosse team did some hazing, and they actually canceled the entire fall season for their lacrosse. They expected to perform menial tasks and other duties for upperclassmen. The report says the team held a party featuring a key race, during which freshmen were challenged to drink large amounts of beer in a competition against other team members. College officials also went on to say that the freshmen were made to stand in a circle and drink beer to the point where multiple members vomited.
It is easy to see in the anthropological origins of group formation how rites of passage have been adopted from historical practice. However, modern society has evolved, and there's no place in Georgetown's cultural context for those outdated understandings of the most effective ways to bring new people into membership in groups. All of those less developed cultural practices would meet the modern definition of hazing, as would many commonly accepted activities in athletics, fraternities, and other social groups. Georgetown defines hazing as the abuse of power by members of an organization used against individuals who are either seeking membership or hold membership, whereby those individuals are subjected to unproductive and/or excessive physical, psychological, or emotional discomfort in order to either join or maintain full rights of membership. While with the understanding that every group finds strength in the creation of unique cultures, that transmitting cultures over multiple generations create longitudinal bonds, and that humans do have a healthy need to create social connections with others, we want to help provide you with rites of initiation examples that are healthful. They can serve the same purpose as admitting new members and creating a strong group identity. They do so in a way that's been consistently proven to ultimately create healthier individuals and group outcomes. If you have questions about what your team or your group is doing and you're uncertain, please ask. As influencers in the Georgetown community, our expectation of student athletes is not only that you're just and compassionate users of power and privilege, but also that you choose to become active bystanders in the face of misuse of power whenever possible. One of our fears is that too often young people become passive bystanders and fall into the bystander effect. In most of these hazing incidents, especially where there are serious injuries and even death that happen, it's not the entire group that participates, and things happen that could have easily been stopped if 1 or 2 people had had the courage to speak up for justice. Wikipedia defines the bystander effect as a social psychological phenomenon where individuals do not offer any means of help to a victim when other people are present. Probability of help is inversely related to the number of bystanders. In other words, the greater the number of bystanders, the less likely it is that any of them will help. Georgetown is expressly committed to the Jesuit understanding of education as a process that involves transmission of knowledge and the formation of character. One result of this philosophy is the determination that extracurricular and co-curricular activities supported by the university, including athletics, provide opportunities for the development of knowledge, the cultivation of virtue, building of community, and student leadership development. Student organizations at Georgetown must have open membership, meaning anybody can join. We don't believe in the kind of selection processes that Greek life often has, unless a group is given special permission to use selection criteria such as music or athletic ability. And that's why we can limit participation on teams simply by somebody's ability to play the sport at the Division I level. Because all organizations must be open to all enrolled students who wish to join, rites of initiation must be team building. They have to serve the purpose of creating inclusive, affirming, self-exploring, and culturally educational processes that help new members gain comfort and familiarity. They can't be designed to exclude, to select, or extract any sort of sacrifice from people interested in joining the group. Rites of initiation like that fit the definition of hazing, and you can see in front of you how the NCAA differentiates between hazing and team building. The sad reality is that 20% of all student athletes, 1 out of every 5, are victims of hazing, and whether they suffer obvious physical injury or not, there are lifelong issues that can happen as a result of being hazed. So what are some healthy rites of initiation? Some examples would be memorization or recitation of a mission statement. One of the key determinants of group efficacy and cohesion is a clearly defined sense of mission or purpose, and every group on campus should work to develop a mission statement that every member can recite and use to focus their decisions. There are traditional team bonding challenges and activities that you can use, mandatory shared study hall time, events that contribute meaningful and clearly to individual development that are appropriate and also create a sense of common bond but are actually productive. You can create alumni mentoring events that develop intentional mentoring between current or new students and alumni. This is one powerful way to transmit culture. You can do other small group exploration of significant events, strengths, highlights in their group's history, or do individual inventories like Myers-Briggs or DISC profiles. You can do shared community service requirements as one of the most effective ways to create memories, and it reflects the core element of Jesuit philosophy that we absolutely should serve others as leaders. We urge all teams to integrate a service learning component into your culture. When we narrow in our discussion about power from groups to individuals, there are a variety of individual misuses or abuses that leaders have a responsibility to address. Bullying has been an epidemic in high schools and on college campuses in the last decade. It's not something we often see in athletics, but it's something about which we have to be aware. It's defined as an inappropriate application of power that can happen between peers or students and faculty or staff or administrators, but the nature of bullying requires that one person have a significant level of either formal or informal power authority over another. According to the National Center Against Bullying, it's not single episodes of social rejection or dislike, single episode acts of nastiness or spite, or random acts of aggression or intimidation. Those things can be harmful, but they don't cross the threshold of bullying unless someone does them repeatedly and deliberately. In other words, when it becomes part of their style of leading, teaching, parenting, or coaching. We do not ever accept bullying from coaches, student athletes, or staff members, and you have a responsibility to address this misuse of personal power if you see something that clearly meets the definition. Though incidents of bullying can have tragic circumstances, it is another type of personal misuse of power that is even more concerning on campuses right now: sexual misconduct, sexual violence, and sexual assault. Title IX of the U.S. Education Amendments of 1972 is probably most famous for its requirements that universities provide equal opportunities for men and women. But it also has clear guidelines for universities that receive federal funding in terms of how they deal with sexual harassment, discrimination, and sexual assault. Sexual violence includes attempted or completed rape or sexual assault, as well as sexual harassment, stalking, voyeurism, exhibitionism, verbal or physical sexually based threats or abuse, and intimate partner violence. At its worst, it involves incredible physical and psychological harm and violence that you can see. But the unseen can be just as powerful, just as impactful, and just as awful for the people that become victims. There are 2 overwhelming messages associated with sexual violence on campus. It is happening to a frightening number of young women, and the perpetrators are overwhelmingly men who are known to the women. Alcohol and drugs are often involved, But what is always involved is a misuse of power at a personal level. Quite often, it is the result of young men asserting an unhealthy sense of power and privilege over women. And victims are often in position to unwillingly yield power to their assailant for a variety of reasons. With a growing number of public cases and increased visibility on Capitol Hill for victims' rights advocates, universities are taking a much more serious look at how they manage sexual assault and violence cases. Since victims can choose to leave cases in the hands of universities, they're sometimes poorly handled and left on campuses outside of the judicial system, with victims unprotected. Though athletics is not always involved, we are the most visible unit on any campus. Student athletes are widely perceived to have power and privilege on campus that makes it relatively easy for outsiders to believe they might misuse that power in various ways, including sexual assault. ESPN recently did an Outside the Lines report on sexual assault on campus by student athletes with a focus on a football player at Missouri. It's worth watching and reflecting on by everyone involved in athletics on any college campus. Key contributors to sexual assault on campus have been identified as sexual socialization, a lack of sanctions, male peer group support, pornography use, a lack of empathy, and membership in all male groups. You can see from some of those factors that student athletes, male student athletes in particular, are highly exposed to some of these risk factors. But the most startling and saddest thing you should take away is that 25% of women on a college campus will be victims of sexual assault and violence before they graduate. That's 1 out of every 4.
Four years ago, she was a newly minted University of Missouri graduate with a bright future. Then, in the early morning hours of June 19, 2010, she was asleep in her bed in this apartment complex near campus.
I had closed the door but had not locked it. And then the next thing I woke up to was Derek sexually assaulting me.
Derek was football player Derek Washington, Missouri's star running back. Breckel fled to this nearby parking lot and called her parents.
I just screamed and yelled and said, "This is what happened to me. He's a football player. Why did this happen? How is this happening?" I was in shock. I was in absolute shock. And I thought no one would believe me.
But what Breckel didn't know was that Derek Washington already had a documented history of violence against women at Missouri. An Outside the Lines investigation has revealed that numerous university officials knew about previous incidents and failed to protect Breckel and other potential victims.
Derek told me all about how he was the best football player ever, how he was such a big deal.
This former Missouri student, who we'll call Jess, agreed to speak to Outside the Lines on the condition that we not reveal her identity. She says she first met Washington in 2007, almost 3 years before the incident with Teresa Breckel. In the fall of 2008, the Tigers were undefeated, ranked 3rd in the country, and Washington led the nation in scoring. After a tough loss to Oklahoma State in mid-October, Jess says she and Washington were hanging out in her dorm room. She says they had been friends, but that particular evening turned intimate.
We started kissing, making out, and then he started fingering me. And that was about as far as I was willing to go. And so then he said, let's have sex. I said, no, you know that I don't do that. You know that I'm not comfortable with that.
She says she consented to oral sex with Washington that night, but when he pressed her to go further, she refused.
And then he got on top of me, and that's when I was like, what are you doing? Like, get off of me. And
you said no.
Yes, I said no. Like, don't do that. Get off me. And I went to push him off of me, and he grabbed both of my wrists with one hand and just proceeded to put his penis inside of me. And I just kept crying and saying no. I remember just looking at him, and he just looked like he wasn't there. Finally, he stopped. and realized that I was crying. I was so upset. And when I was finally able to push him off me, he just kept saying if I said anything, they would kick him off the football team. And so if I said anything, he would kill me and then kill himself.
So he threatened to kill you.
Oh yeah.
4 days later, concerned about a vaginal cut, she went to the Student Health Center and eventually acknowledged she'd been raped.
They just kept asking me, who did this to you? I had some kind of gash on my neck. I had bruises on my wrists. I looked beat up, and I refused to tell them who did it. Because I was really freaked out. The lady from the women's shelter convinced me that I should come forward and tell the police who hurt me, in case he was going to hurt other people.
So six days later, Jess reported the incident to campus police and named Washington. They opened a forcible rape investigation and brought him in for questioning.
Do you have any idea why he did that?
Outside the Lines obtained Washington's videotaped interview with Detective Sam Easley.
And what exactly did she say?
Is that she on that?
How many times did she say that?
Every three.
But Washington, who declined to comment for the story, told Easley they did have intercourse that night.
How long was your penis inside of her before she sits up?
30 seconds. And then she said stop, and then I stopped. Then she started crying.
Was she ever like trying to push up on your chest or anything? What I'm getting at here is, do you acknowledge that what happened shouldn't have happened?
Yeah, it shouldn't.
Do you acknowledge that what happened could be possibly considered to be an assault of some sort?
No.
Okay.
After his investigation, Easley stated he had probable cause to believe a rape had occurred. Washington's parents told Outside the Lines that football coaches met with them about the incident and indicated that charges likely wouldn't be filed. And as it turned out, the prosecutor opted for a deferred prosecution agreement, which meant he would not charge Washington if he had no contact with Jess and took rape awareness classes.
No matter what happened with the police or prosecutor, it was right then the University of Missouri was legally bound to act to make sure Jess felt safe here and to protect other students. The federal law, part of Title IX, requires colleges do their own investigation into reports of sexual violence and to assess the needs of victims separate from the criminal process.
Even though multiple university officials knew of Jess's rape allegation, including her academic advisor and some football coaches, it's not clear whether any of these officials told the Title IX coordinator. But Outside the Lines has confirmed there was no Title IX investigation. During that 2008 season, Derek Washington never missed a game. He scored 19 touchdowns. One former athletic department employee who says she had no idea Washington was accused of sexual assault was Teresa Breckel, who had tutored him while she was a student. On that June night of 2010, nearly 2 years after Jess's rape allegation, Breckel was living here with a woman who was friends with Washington. That night, her roommate told her he would be stopping by.
So I say, well, I'm going to go ahead and go to bed. I have to be at work tomorrow morning. I had closed the door but had not locked it. And I woke up to Derek digitally penetrating me. I mean, it was terrifying. I think by the time I realized what was going on, I tensed, and then Derek left the room. And I can't describe the level of fear that I felt. I mean, I've never felt that scared my whole life.
Breckel says when Washington assaulted her with his finger, it was especially traumatizing because she was a virgin.
I had made a choice to live my life a certain way, and then all of a sudden one night, someone took that away from me and wasn't given permission to come in, and I didn't want him to come in. But there he was, assaulting me.
So awful. They knew what he did. They knew what he did to me, and they did nothing, and then they allowed him to do it to another girl.
Later that day, Greco went to the hospital where a sexual assault exam was performed. She filed a campus police report and obtained a restraining order against Washington. Then she left Missouri.
I was terrified. I thought that Derek was going to come after me. I moved home. It was time for me to just kind of close the shutters and be by myself and to try to feel safe and to cope with what had happened.
It took a lot for me to come forward. A lot. It just makes me wonder how many other girls there are out there that never said anything.
As it turns out, other women did report violent behavior by Washington. Early in the morning on May 6, 2010, 6 weeks before Breckel's assault, a Missouri women's soccer player got into a fight at this bar with Washington's girlfriend. The soccer player told police that during the scuffle, Washington walked up and struck her with a closed fist on the left side of her face. After both women were arrested, the soccer player told police she wanted to press charges against Washington, and a warrant request was issued for assault in the third degree. But she returned later that day and told police she had changed her mind.
This is her narrative from her talking to the detective, and she stated that her coach made her feel as though she would not have any problems with her scholarship if she declined to prosecute Derek Washington for assaulting her. She stated that her coach said her scholarship would be fine if the incident stayed out of the news. She had thought about the situation, and she decided she wanted to decline prosecution on Mr. Washington.
I mean, that's disgusting. That a coach told her or encouraged her to not move forward with charges.
You're allowing this student to just keep doing what he's doing, and he keeps getting more girls. I don't understand how they can live with themselves.
While campus police were investigating Washington for Breckel's sexual assault, he was named a captain of the football team. Head coach Gary Pinkel later suspended Washington a few days before he was arrested for felony deviant sexual assault, but the school allowed him to stay on campus. 13 days later, while Washington was out on bail, police were dispatched to this apartment complex. He was arrested again, this time for allegedly beating up his ex-girlfriend. According to the police report, there was blood on her and all over the apartment. She told the officer he had tried to push her eyeballs into her skull, and that he had assaulted her more than 5 times during their relationship. 4 police reports. 4 documented allegations of violent acts against women in less than 2 years. It was then that Derek Washington left the university.
6 men and 6 women on the jury deliberated for 2.5 hours and found Washington guilty of deviant sexual assault.
In September of 2011, jurors convicted Derek Washington of sexually assaulting Teresa Breckel. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but was released after 4 months as part of a first-time offenders program. Both women waived privacy laws to allow officials at the University of Missouri to speak with outside the lines about their cases. But President Tim Wolf, former Chancellor Brady Deaton, Athletic Director Mike Alden, head football coach Gary Pinkel, and Title IX coordinator Noel English all declined to be interviewed.
Sexual assault, sexual violence, violence against women are all manifestations of really inappropriate uses of personal power and injustice on our campuses. One way to think about it, one safe approach to the issue on campus, is something the state of California is considering voting into law, but has already been adopted by the University of California system. They now require an affirmative assent element of consensual sentence. An affirmative conscious, and voluntary agreement to engage in sexual activity. This is consistent with our own code of conduct and the safest way to approach physical intimacy. The important words to remember are affirmative, meaning both parties must clearly say yes and not just say no. Conscious, which means requires awareness without undue influence or lowered inhibitions. And voluntary, which means there can be no coercion, force, or intimidation involved. There is a new act of Congress, federal law, called the Campus Sexual Assault Violation Act, and it has some details that tell universities what they need to be doing in terms of programming, education, and dealing with the issue of sexual assault and violence on campus. The reason we've had this conversation with student athletes is that you've been given a great deal. Some of you have more power and privilege than others, but we have high expectations of you. Regardless of your other identities and descriptions, all student athletes have some level of power and privilege that bring great responsibility and expectations. Whatever your level may be, we want to equip you to begin making choices now that will reduce your chances of being either a perpetrator or a victim. Just as importantly, we hope that you will challenge yourself to become an influencer, an active bystander who will help create a culture of safety and justice both within your team and the greater community around you.